Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It would be wonderful if we could all be together in Paris or anywhere, actually, together. That's my hope. So on this
Recording in progress.
So on this very first slide, there's my contact information. We have just a little time today. So if you don't get a chance to ask a question or if something bothers you tomorrow, please send me some email and I'd be happy to talk to you. If you think the presentation was worthwhile and you'd like to have the slides, just ask for the PowerPoint. There's no copyright on any of these slides or any of the slides that I use to give talks. I'm happy to give it to you. You can change it around. You can do anything you want. It's yours. So if you think the information is worthwhile, that's the greatest compliment, is to ask me to give you my slides. We're talking about thinking, and this is what we're doing now. We sit, we stare, we focus at a computer screen, whether we're doing it alone or whether we're doing it, well, this is what we're doing now, isn't it? Sitting, staring, focused, looking at a screen. And this is what we think thinking is all about. What we know about all of those group settings or individual settings is that we are doing the same thing. We're sitting, we're staring, we're focused, we're under a lot of pressure, we have deadlines, so therefore we don't want to take a break. If we would do that, then everyone would know that we're not working. And since our job is thinking, this is what we think thinking is all about. So if I could see you, I would ask if you have heard of the book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And some of you would raise your hands. Yes, you've heard of the book. It was published, after all, in 2011. The book was written by Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize in 2002. I think it's one of the most important books I have ever read in my entire life. And I have read a lot of books. I waited for people to not only hear about the book, but to read it. So then my next question for you is, if you've heard of the book, did you buy it? If you bought the book, did you read the first chapter? Maybe the second chapter? Did you make it through the whole book? And unfortunately, the answer turns out to be probably not. It's a difficult book to read. It's pretty heavy going. It's very dense. So I finally decided I'd better do something. I better make some way that other people could understand what was in the book and get the big message from it, because it was going to be too difficult for most people to read. Not that you're not smart enough to read it, it's just that you don't have the time. You're spending too much time staring at a screen. So my goal today is to give you some useful bits of information from this book, because it is a book about science. It's not a book about experience. It's not a book about case studies. It's not a book about stories. It's a book about evidence. What we know is those of us who have anything to do with software development in any form is that we don't do science. We share stories, which are very convincing, and we look at what others are doing, and we take that as evidence without any randomized, controlled experiments. So we should at least pay attention to those who are doing experiments. I'm sure a lot of those apply directly to what we do. And certainly in the case of Kahneman's work, that is the case. So Kahneman developed a model for your brain and how you think. And in the model, he talks about two modes or two ways of thinking. He calls them System 1 and System 2. Now, System 1 is what we might call the unconscious. It's not exactly the unconscious, but pretty close. And what we know about System 1 is that this is the fast part in thinking fast and slow. This is the automatic, the rapid, the intuitive part of our thinking. What we've been able to learn about System 1 is that it can do many things. It monitors all your bodily functions. So it not only contributes to what we might call your thinking, but it also regulates your blood pressure, your heart rate, your body temperature. It has an unbelievable memory for all your experience. It remembers everything, everything you've ever seen, everything you've ever heard, everything you've ever done. The problem is, of course, that it's unconscious. We cannot access it directly. It's a very fast processor. It's been clocked at 11 million bits per second. And almost everything we do, our decisions, our ideas, our expertise, all of that resides in System 1. The problem is we cannot reach into it and ask it specifically, and we forget. So it's unconscious. This is our gut feeling, our source of inspiration, insight, System 1. System 2, on the other hand, is what we consciously think of as thinking, because as soon as we wake up in the morning, System 2 comes online and it begins to talk to us. It's very different from System 1. System 2 tells us all day long what it's thinking and what it's doing. In the Thinking Fast and Slow title, this is the slow piece. Conscious thinking is not only slow, but it's linear, one step at a time. It's the rational part of your mind. It also doesn't remember much. And this is not just true for old people like me. This is true for everyone. It has a measurable limit on memory size. It's also clocked at about 40 bits per second. Compare that to the 11 million of System 1. So it's slow, deliberate, linear. Its contribution to our ideas is minuscule, about 5%. But since it talks to us all day long, it's the part about which we are most aware. So we think this is what thinking is all about. This is the part that stares at the screen and tries to solve problems. System 2. We identify with it when we think about I did this, or I decided that. We're talking about System 2. So psychologists used to believe that System 1 and System 2 were like this iceberg. You know that in an iceberg, most of it is below the surface. So they said, this part below the surface, that must be the unconscious or system one, whereas this part above the water, well, that must be system two, to give us an idea, a metaphor, if you will, for the relative sizes of these parts of our brain. But as we learn more and more about system one and system two, what we discover is that the contribution to our thinking of system two is really less and less important. So now the metaphor is the snowball on the right-hand peak. That little tiny snowball, that's really system two. And all of the rest of this above the water, as well as all of this below the water, all of that is system one. Kahneman was trying to tell us the difference between system one and system two. And the message is system one is enormous. It is huge compared to the part we think of as thinking. And we're not using it to our best advantage. System one does have some problems. It's not perfect. Most people who read Kahneman's book come away learning that system one is flawed. It has a series of, well, they're called heuristics. The ways it makes decisions, they're not perfect. They make mistakes. In fact, they do it in a predictable manner. We are predictably erroneous in our thinking. But it's also the home of our expertise. When we learn how to do anything well, whether it's play a musical instrument, participate in a sport, learn a programming language, anything we learn ultimately resides in system one. So it's flawed, but it's the home of all that we know. It also has a storyteller that continually makes up a story about what's going on in the world. And that story is about us. The story tries to make sense of what's going on in the world and our place in it. And that is mostly fiction. But we all believe it because it comes from what we think our understanding of reality is. So we're all walking around believing that we see reality clearly, when really it's the story that our system one tells us constantly about what's going on in the world. System one is the home of a series of cognitive biases, and I'm only going to talk about one, but if you search on cognitive bias, you'll uncover a huge and growing list of these biases or heuristics that system one uses when it tells us a story. The worst, and we are all unfortunately victims of this bias. The worst is called confirmation bias. Once we believe anything, it has to be a deep belief, a belief we care about. Once we have that, then we will make sure that we only see information that validates that belief. We will filter out, we will ignore, we will discount any contradictory information. Right now in the United States, we are struggling because there are too many people who refuse to be vaccinated. And those of us who believe that this is the way forward, who have been vaccinated, we look at those people and we say, what is wrong with them? Why can't they look at the information? Don't they see that people are dying? Don't they see that now children are dying? Isn't that convincing? And the answer is no. Once they have decided that vaccination is a bad thing, then all the information in the world will not convince them. They will find a way around it. They will find a way to discount it. And I should not use the pronoun they, because we all do that. Once we have a deep belief, we don't look at facts. It's our worst cognitive bias, and it lives in system one. And as a result, we tend to think that we see reality clearly. We've got it all figured out. We know what's going on in the world. We have looked at the facts. We have studied the evidence. When really everything that we hear and read and see is filtered through those cognitive biases. We also don't like randomness. We don't want to believe in randomness. We want to believe that there are patterns and reasons and explanations for why things happen. So our brains don't do well when something just happens because it happens. Randomness is not an acceptable explanation for system one. Most people who read it see clearly system one is flawed. The evidence shows that. But on the other hand, remember, it also contains everything that you know, all your expertise. And we walk away with it not really understanding how to use it. Kahneman doesn't do a good job of explaining that, I think. In fact, Kahneman says people pick up the book and they read it and they want to get better at thinking. And his primary message is, it's very difficult. All of these biases in system one, everyone has them. His quote is, some people read Thinking Fast and Slow, hoping it will improve their minds. I wrote it and it didn't improve my mind. These things are deep and powerful and almost impossible to change. System two, on the other hand, that's our slow, linear processor. That's what you're using right now to listen to me when you have to pay attention, because system two takes enormous effort. It really doesn't have much more than 50 minutes of concentration before it really has to take a break. That part of you that gets worn out by working hard all day, that's system two. The part that you think is making decisions, it uses up about 25% of the energy you take in every day just to run system two. That's our gateway. That's how we learn. If you want to learn something new, system two must practice it. Deliberate practice. And slowly, the pieces of that expertise, whether it's playing the violin or engaging in a sport or learning something new for work, gradually those pieces move into system one so that now they become automatic or unconscious. You don't have to really think about it step by step. If you remember anything that you learned over the course of your life, it had these initial conscious, slow steps. And slowly but surely, you began to do it without thinking. Well, of course, you were thinking, it's just that you weren't aware of it. System 2 was learning the skill, handing it over to System 1. And in that process, you add to the enormous power that resides in System 1. And then we forget how to use it. Now, this is just a model. Lots of others have proposed models for thinking. It's not perfect. And as we learn more, we will see more flaws in it. All models are abstractions. They ignore some things in order to make it easier for us to understand. So it's just one model. And I'm going to take a minute to give you another one that I think maps very well to Kahneman's. This is from the work of Jonathan Haidt. It was also published in a book by Chip and Dan Heath called Switch. And they said, your mind is like an elephant with a rider. Now, let's do a little topological mapping. The elephant, of course, is the unconscious, the big, giant, powerful piece of your mind. The little tiny, rational thinker, the rider, that's your System 2. And what I like about this model is that, yes, it maps to Kahneman's, but it also includes the path. The path the elephant takes is the context, the environment, the situation where you find yourself. And that has enormous impact. Kahneman ignores that. And I think it's important. So my advice now, whenever you're talking to anyone who doesn't agree with you, is realize you're talking to the elephant. And the best way to influence the elephant is not to argue with facts, because the elephant, your System 1, is not rational. But the elephant does pay attention to the path. If you want the elephant to go in a direction, make the path easier. In fact, for most change, whether it's an individual or an organization, a team in the organization, make it easier for all those elephants to go the way you want them to. Scientific evidence shows clearly that when people are presented with an easier path, that's a pattern from Fearless Change, that's the direction they will go. Almost 100% of the time, we will take the easier path. So we will keep that in the back of our minds. System 2 takes a lot of work, enormous amount of energy. You can measure it. We know that if you spend a lot of time focusing and using your System 2, you can measure the drop in blood glucose. It takes enormous energy. Don't waste it. That's the message today. Don't waste your System 2. When you're tired, or when you're hungry, or when you've been focusing too long, your System 2 doesn't work very well. You have used up all of the energy. That's why we make bad decisions when we're tired or hungry, and why we need breaks. Normally, these two sessions work together. We normally work and share information. But what we know is that the system in charge is System 1. That is where all our decisions are made and where all of our important insights originate. There's an experiment that shows very clearly that when people have been paying too much attention, they're much more likely to choose chocolate cake over fruit salad. If you've ever been on a diet, you know that in the morning, it's pretty easy. You don't have any trouble. But as the day goes on, your decisions become poorer and poorer because you've overworked your system 2. One of my favorite quotes comes from one of my favorite presidents. President Obama said in 2014, "You'll notice I only wear 2 colors. I don't want to spend conscious attention, which takes a lot of my energy. I don't want to waste time. I have plenty of other decisions to make." It's true for the president. It's true for you. Rule number 1, don't waste time on it. If it's not important to you, hand it over to somebody else or just ignore it. So I have been using System 1 without realizing it. I was a mathematician for many years, working on problems until late at night. And at some point, I would give up, go to sleep, wake up in the morning, and suddenly find that I had solved the problem. Overnight, somehow, I had solved the problem. It just appeared. The answer just appeared. So I don't believe in angels, but if I did, maybe that's what I would have said at the time. Maybe angels came in the night and said, "Linda, the answer is 42. I've been trying to tell you." Well, after reading Kahneman's book, I realized System 1 was working on it all night long. System 1 never sleeps. What if I had handed over the problem to System 1 earlier without waiting until I was totally exhausted? And I found in my research a whole host of innovative thinkers like Arthur Fry, who created the Post-it note, who realized this, that when you're stuck on a problem that needs insight, if you just leave it, go to sleep, do something else. System 1, that's where all your expertise resides. System 1 will solve it for you. So I began an experiment several years ago, and I am still working on this, but I want to hand it over to you as a better way of thinking, a better way of using your System 1 and System 2. So step 1, do you know what the problem is? What is it that you're trying to solve? Can you define it? It's good to say it out loud. It's good to write it down. Do you know enough to solve the problem? Don't waste a lot of time with this step. Do you have enough information? And then, can you solve it? Give it about, and my limit is 10 minutes. If I can't solve it in 10 minutes, I leave it. I do something else. The research scientists who are looking at how to use System 1 and System 2 call this incubation. What it means is leaving that problem behind and doing something else. Work on another task, or just stand up. Look out the window. Stretch. Run over to the bathroom. Do a little exercise. Have a snack. You might find that in the middle, the solution appears. Don't get stuck looking for data. Analysis paralysis is bad in software development and in thinking. So these are complicated solutions. It's not, I'm just not asking for an answer. Should I do this or not? We know that symphonies have been composed this way. Novels have been written. You know, System 2 cannot multitask, but System 1 can. So don't try to overuse your System 2. System 2 is for complicated things that require that you pay attention. What you're doing now, reading a book, anytime you have to pay attention. Most of us don't spend a lot of time doing nothing. We're reluctant to hand things over to System 1. We want to coerce it into solving it with System 2. It's a big mistake. It's not good for our brains. Warren Buffett advises spending a lot of time just thinking. Just spending time thinking. Steve Jobs did it by taking a walk. If he had an idea he wanted to work out, he would go find a cohort and say, let's go for a walk. Let's think about this. I'm going to move ahead because you've just given me the 5-minute warning. Say, I hope I've given you some ideas for little experiments in your lives, for stop staring at your screens. Stop working your System 2 on solving problems that System 1 has already solved for you. Learn to take a break. Learn to stand up, move around, hand over that complicated problem to your System 1. It'll not only save you time, save you energy, you'll come up with better ideas. So do your own experiments. I'm still improving my problem-solving process, but I'd be happy to talk to you about it. We know that System 1 can provide answers for all kinds of things. And you may not like the answer initially, so you run through that iteration again to say, well, logically, I'm not sure that makes sense to me. I'll sleep on it and see what happens. This is now how I live my life. I solve complicated problems, not just about technical things, about things that have to do with work, but everything in my life. I now use my System 1, and I think I'm getting better. So I'd be happy to take any questions. If you still have your System 2 operating and you'd like to offer up a question.
Vous avez le micro de Gabriel pour poser des questions à Linda.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. You know, sometimes, do you think that the System 1 can be overloaded sometimes also? Because you talk about System 2 to be overloaded sometimes because we only have a limited time where we can focus. But in my personal life, for example, a heartbreak or something else like in work with a lot of stress, my System 2 was saying, don't worry, it's not very important, it's okay. You're still alive, you still have a job and a house. But my System 1 was telling me, oh my God, it's horrible. So do you have any insight about this, or is the book saying something about that too, about how System 1 can overload sometimes or not? I don't really know. Thank you.
Hey, good question. And I should have mentioned something about that, but System 2 is definitely limited in so many ways. But System 1 is amazing because right now it seems to have no limit. You can keep piling on problems for System 1 to work on without limit. And remember, System 1 is also monitoring all your bodily functions. It takes care of making sure that your blood pressure is regulated, that your heartbeat happens, that your cholesterol levels are acceptable. It has an enormous number of things that it seems to be able to do And right now, there are scientists trying to measure that. It seems to have no limit. What we need to do is learn how to use it. So I have an entire talk about the problem you just mentioned. In this time of pandemic and very high stress levels, what can we do to alleviate that? What kinds of things can we say to System 1? So if you send me some email, I can point you to a couple of talks that are on YouTube that talk about several things that you can do to address that. But you don't need to worry about overloading System 1. Right now, it has no limit.
Thank you. When you say System 1 does not have any limit, sometimes I'm like, I can read a lot of things, and it seems like System 1 is mostly an infinite black hole where all my knowledge goes and I never get it back. So in this kind of way, yeah, I agree, there's no limit, but is there any way to consciously retrieve some of this information, or are they lost forever?
There are people working on ways of accessing the information in System 1. The primary method now seems to be to do something else. That when you switch from working on a problem to doing something else, and the more different the new task is from the old task. So if you're trying to remember something, or you know that you have the expertise to solve a problem, but it is not forthcoming, the best thing to do is leave it. Do something else, and in fact, do something very different. And when you do that, it seems to open up a little conduit between System 1 and System 2, and then suddenly the information that you need will appear. And this is not just for technical things. So I tell a story about music because I'm a musician. I live in Nashville, and I have a lot of music in my house. I have enormous piles of music sorted according to category. And I was looking for a piece of music the other day, and I couldn't find it. And I asked my husband, I said, did you move this piece of music? I knew I was going to want to work on it. And he said, no, I didn't. And I said, well, I know it must be here. I'm going to tear this room apart. I'm going to look through all my files. I know I must have put that music in here somewhere. Now, I love my husband for many reasons, and one of them is that he reminds me of all the advice I give to other people. So in this situation, he simply said to me, Linda, leave it. Just leave it. Do something else. And he was right. Don't you hate that? He was right. So I did something else. I was working on writing an article, and I thought, all right, I'll go work on my article for a while. And after 15, 20 minutes working on the article, suddenly I realized where the music was. System 1 knew as soon as I do something very different, it opens up a door. And now that information has a way of breaking through and telling you what it is that you needed to know. So you can find music, you can solve complicated problems, you can make difficult decisions, you can create new ideas. Just do something different. Leave it. That's so hard. Even for me, I forget. Just leave it and do something else. The more different, the better.
I think we're... Can you hear me? Yeah. People are clapping now. Thank you very much, Linda. We have 4 minutes. Do you want to add something for that 4 minutes? Or we can leave it here, like you just said.
I'm okay, whatever.
Up to you. If you say it's done, it's done. Oh, okay. I know it's...
I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any final words?
So I've only been, I had to read the book 3 times. So don't feel bad if you have the book and you haven't read it. But I hope now you might have a little incentive to spend time with it, because I've just given you a very superficial overview of a book that was written by someone who won a Nobel Prize. So he's a genius, I'm not. You might not even agree with my interpretation if you have the chance to read the book, and you should. Because what you do all day is think. And there's now a lot of evidence, a lot of scientific evidence. This is not just New Age storytelling. This is now science. And we who think for a living, we need to pay attention, all of us. So good luck with that.
Thank you, Linda. Can you put back the first slide you put with your contact information? People are interested to take a picture of it.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think we can stop here.